Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, things have been a little hectic, though not debilitatingly so. I had that workshop up in Boston last Friday that I mentioned last week. Problem was there was an impending snowstorm Friday evening, and that meant Amy and I had to scuttle plans to stay over and have an early anniversary celebration in Boston and nice dinner and all that stuff. The hotel at least was accommodating. They canceled my second night without charging me, which was nice. And the downside was she stayed home. I wound up driving 4+ hours each way on Thursday and Friday with lots of time to myself, which is never great. And by the time I got home Friday night, especially after 7 hours of sitting in a conference room for the workshop, I was pretty zonked. And this week it's down to D.C. for a congressional briefing that I'm going crazy prepping for. It's me and 5 of my member companies and presentation and Q&A and hoping people show up and blah, blah, blah. But after it wraps, I haven't booked my train home yet. I may go on to Charlottesville straight from D.C. to see a friend of mine for what's likely to be the last time. He's got a terminal brain cancer diagnosis. The timeline isn't optimistic, and well, that's what I might do. From there, I'd have to figure out how to get back to New Jersey. The likeliest route is just the 6-hour Northeast Regional Amtrak from Charlottesville all the way up to Newark, which will leave me zonked yet again, and with more time just to myself, and not even driving, where I have to pay attention to the road. So we'll see. But these are the things that we have to do, right? I mean, at least if you're a Boy Scout like me. I should note, I was never actually in the Boy Scouts. I was a second child, and my parents' marriage was already deteriorating as I started to move through childhood. So I got none of the first child stuff like Boy Scouts or organized sports or orthodonture, which is why you never actually see me fully smile in a photograph. Anyway, I'm not bitter exactly. I'm bitter about lots of stuff, but not that, I guess. Well, my brother and I talked on the drive back from Boston. I asked him that question that was in my Substack last week about where on earth he and I developed our values from. And he thinks it was the Marvel Comics of the 70s. And that's I guess good enough when you get down to it, letting Stan Lee and Roger Stern and Steve Englehart and people like that kind of shape who you are as a kid. Could be worse, I guess. Could have been DC. But anyway, I bring this up because on the drive to Boston, I stopped in on some old friends in Providence for 90 minutes or so. One of them had been in a gnarly accident recently, getting hit by a car while he was out on an afternoon walk. And he was recovering well, and we took a little walk to a bookstore and cafe during my visit. Got a walking stick, but he was motoring down the sidewalk, really pushing it. It was great to see them, even though I knew it meant I was going to face Zeno's paradox levels of traffic once I got up to Cambridge at rush hour. Like, I left their place of Providence at 4 o'clock, and that just meant I was doomed by the time I got into Boston. But as I was heading out, they thanked me for making the time to visit. And the thing was, we hadn't seen each other since before the pandemic. We've been in touch by email and postcard and such, but I told them how happy I was to see them. But also that, if the past 3 years have taught us anything, it's that, maybe next time is some bullshit. Just, and I'm not trying to seem holier than thou, or, I've got some greater responsibility to people than you. But I mean, I haven't seen my mother or my brother and his family out in St. Louis in like 4 or 5 years. So I've made my own share of capitulations and excuses, but I am figuring out how to go to see them next month. There should be a weekend free that Amy and I can get out there and reconnect with the people who should be closest to me. But all I'm saying is, don't make excuses. I mean, I could have easily said, oh, I'd love to stop in and see you, but I got to get up before traffic and blah, blah, blah. What would that have mattered? Anyway, let's get to this week's show, which was recorded last night. So this is a quick turnaround. My guest is the writer, cartoonist, director, and artist, Dean Haspiel. And the reason I'm turning this episode around so quickly is because Dean's got a Kickstarter for a new project, and it's active for the month of March 2023. So if you're listening to this after that, screw off. You should have been listening in real time. And it's for a comic book called COVID Cop. Now, Dino has sent me the first 16 pages of COVID Cop, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. It's a hoot. He'll describe the science fiction, superhero, hard-boiled, satirical premise early in the conversation, so I'm not going to go on about it here. It's a fun comic with a ton of energy and humor, and worth supporting via Kickstarter. It's also a reminder of those past bunch of years and the weird twists and turns our lives and the ways we saw the world have changed, and how many times they've changed since March 2020. We'll use as a measuring point. Now, I'll have a link to the Kickstarter in the show and episode notes for this one because it's a long URL. You can find it by going to Kickstarter.com and searching for COVID Cop, or for Dean Haspiel, which is Haspiel, but COVID Cop is the easiest thing to look for. But the thing is, when Dino mentioned that he had this Kickstarter going, I thought, well, time limited, but the thing is, a Kickstarter is also sort of a Trojan horse for me, because Dean and I haven't recorded in years, except for one of my COVID check-in episodes during that early 2020 lockdown. And he has been up to a ton of creative work during this period, in comics, in theater, in short films, in collaborations, in teaching. He's got a lot going on. So I wanted to catch up and find out about those projects, about, COVID Cop and the other stuff he's working on, but also on another level to find out about the flowering of creativity that he's going through, and the pursuit of different storytelling modes, and the drive to tell stories when so many people are kind of walloped or exhausted by anxiety, by the new reality we're in, by so many different factors. Dean, just a few years older than me, in his mid-50s, is finding a new phase or another gear for what he's doing. And so I was pretty interested in sitting down for a conversation with him. Because my life is so hectic, I wasn't able to go out to Brooklyn to record. So we did this one remotely, but here we are. Here's Dean's bio. Emmy and Ringo Award-winning cartoonist Dean Haspiel is best known for creating The Red Hook and Billy Dogma, collaborating with Harvey Pekar and Jonathan Ames, and illustrating HBO's Bored to Death series. His published work includes writing and drawing for Marvel, DC Vertigo, Archie, Image, and Webtoon. In addition, Dean is an accomplished playwright, emerging filmmaker, and Yaddo Fellow. He lives in Brooklyn, New York. And now, the 2023 Virtual Memories Conversation with Dean Haspiel. It's your first Kickstarter. Congratulations. COVID Cop.
Thank you.
How is it going? And tell me about COVID Cop, what it is, but let's get a status update right now.
Well, so far so good. Thank you for talking to me about my first Kickstarter. I've been involved in a few other Kickstarters, but I was more adjacent, meaning there was a crowdfunding for my play The War of Wu a couple of years ago that was supposed to mount March 2020.
I believe March 13th, 2020. But yeah, no.
Something like that, yeah. And I think we talked about that a couple of years ago, to be honest. Yeah. And then everything, then COVID happened. And actually, COVID Cop is one of my responses to what happened. to the world a little bit. But yeah, the Kickstarter, the initial goal was funded within 3 days, which is amazing. But I did do a lower ask than what I needed so that I could fund it, at least to the capability of being able to print and distribute it. Yeah. In other words, the artist doesn't get paid, but the printers and the U.S. mail gets paid.
Yeah. But before I ask about ask you to explain COVID Cop or talk through it, did you get a lot of advice about what to do with a Kickstarter? Like in terms of, only set it for this and then hope for, more. Did you get a lot of feedback or, ideas about what you should be doing to structure this?
Well, yes, I did. And luckily, there's been so many comics Kickstarters now. I mean, Kickstarter, it might be the third, if not maybe the fourth biggest publisher of comics, if you think about it. I mean, there's Marvel and DC, and they're the big two. And then I believe Image Comics is considered the third biggest comic book publisher. But I would hazard to say I think Kickstarter is right up there because of how many comics they're involved in publishing or helping publish. But yeah, I talked to people like Jimmy Palmiotti, who has done a bunch of Kickstarters. I've talked to many different people who have had successes with these projects and trying to crowdfund and getting tips here and there of what you should ask, what you should expect. Tom Akel gave me some advice as well. He's at Rocket Ship now, formerly from Webtoon and other publishing houses like MTV back in the day. And after a while it becomes instinctual, and then you go with your gut. And there are a lot of Kickstarter projects that like throw everything and the kitchen sink into this project. And ultimately, I went with my heart and I said, you know what? I just want to publish a comic book here. It could be considered artisanal, because I'm going to not. I'm not going to put it up online. It's not going to be a web comic. Especially with the AI art, pirates these days. Yeah. The less I show of COVID Cop, the more unique it will be in print, and the more special it will feel when it lands on your doorstep and in your hands. And will I have a few relationships possibly with retailers that might, sell it? Sure. I'd have to have some conversations. But, at the end of the day, when I've worked with so many other publishers, and I have, between mainstream and independent, at the end of the day, if I don't own it or it's not my character, then I'm just a custodian that gets a page rate, and with the possibility of a royalty check once in a blue moon. And what's great about Kickstarter, for better or for worse, is that you can do as great as the project does, sure, as the campaign does, and I'm willing to do all the other legwork that it takes because I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Like little insider baseball, when I do a comic book for a company and I get an advance page rate to do the work, and then I solicit it and it comes out later, usually whatever that page rate I made is all I'm going to make. Again, unless it's some kind of story that blows up and, it's not, if it's Watchmen or Dark Knight, yeah, where it's constantly being resold, then you can make some great, change on that. But ultimately, I'm only making, my only incentive really is that page rate and to work on a cool project, and because we're all fans of these characters anyway, it's almost like you're doing fan fiction, yeah. even if it's canon, you know what I'm saying? Right. It feels like fan fiction in some way. But like the thing though that bothers me is, you do the comic and then you're asked to do all the promotion. Like, can you do an interview? And you do like 10 or 20 different interviews. Usually they're handwritten, and I'm trying to figure out different ways to say the same thing about the 10 pages I did here, or the one issue I did there, or the graphic novel where, someone else is the writer, and then they usually get all the play. And the thing is you're not getting paid for that.
Right.
Every time an editor or someone, who's working at a website sends me an email, or, I take a phone call from, they're usually getting paid of some denomination. And I'm not, because I'm trying to do the hefty work of trying to promote the damn thing, right? And I understand that's part of the deal. But after a while, it's exhausting, and it gets in the way of creating new stuff because you're trying to promote the current stuff. And it's the devil, in a lot of ways. And I appreciate it to a certain level. but man, it can be exhausting.
I can imagine. And at least, again, like you say, you're vested in this, anything you're doing for it.
Well, I get the most rewards, the most possible rewards out of self-publishing is what I'm experimenting with here. We'll see how well it ultimately does. And I'd like to do more if this does well. And then that's another question. How many times can you ask someone to kickstart a comic book? So you kind of have to make these things special. Other friends of mine will do like a mini series, and then they're trying to kickstart the 3rd issue or the 4th issue of their project. And I feel like that's where things start to stumble because people ultimately know, I'll just wait for the trade. I'll wait for the collection, and you're like, it's a little difficult because you want to support your friends, you want to support the project, but at the same time, we're not like the big publishers that can spend that kind of money, for something that ultimately is going to be a TV show anyway,
Yeah, I was talking to a pal of mine this weekend who he admitted Kickstarter of his, this goes way back for obvious reasons you'll figure out in a second, that got so unfulfilled it ended up on the Comics Reporter list of Kickstarters that have never been finished. So he had it did ultimately get done after Tom died and after Comics Reporter went defunct, which he felt even worse about. But it was like, the artist just sat on the script for so long. I really wanted to get this out. And it turned into a little mini phenomenon. There's that sense of the responsibility, I guess, really falls on the creators in this respect, even more so than with, working with a publisher.
It's everything. And you're wearing so many hats, right? You're wearing your creator hat, you're wearing your promotional hat, your publisher hat, your distribution hat, and you're learning in public often, right? And growing up in public as we do as artists. But, and a lot of mistakes can happen. But luckily, like I said, there is a little bit of a template for this because enough people have done it.
Right.
So you can see what works. You can review other people's Kickstarters and see what, you like about each one and then set a tone and see what happens. And that's another thing. Like at the end of the day, people are usually supporting you because they just like you. Yeah. And, and the thing that we're all afraid of is to find out how many people don't like us.
Yeah, see, that's what I thought you might have as nervous. Like, people say they like my work, but would they actually put up $10? And
I know.
Well, I'll tell you that.
And then that's another thing is discussing what is a price tag on anything anymore.
Oh, sure.
I was just having a conversation with another a comic book writer, and he was saying that no, you shouldn't ask for that much money. You should ask for this amount of money. And it was less than what I was asking for. I was like, you know what? This isn't, I'm not a company.
Yeah.
I'm not like, I don't have price breaks. I don't do enough volume. Right. And it is something that really is just coming from my home to you. And there's enough evidence of my work out there that, you'll get a sense of what I can do and what you're about to get. And hopefully I can up the ante a little bit by the fact that it is a solo effort. Maybe I can do some other things that I wouldn't be allowed to do with other publishers.
Yeah, tell me.
And that's actually kind of what happened with COVID Cop.
Yeah, I was going to say, tell me about the comic itself and why it has to go this route, And
why it's called COVID Cop. Yeah. I originally called it COVID Cop because that's what it was. It's kind of like inspired by comics like, or characters like Toxic Avenger, Judge Dredd, Mad Max, The World of Sin City, Charles Burns'
I will
Black
also
Hole.
add, having read a chunk of it, martial law.
Well, you know what? That's so great. And I'm glad you said that because I was wondering, is it like martial law? Because I love martial law so much. But I suppose I would throw martial law in there as well.
It's a tougher, it's a deeper cut to call for. But yeah, that was one where I was like, he's got some martial law vibe in here. And I'm all down with that completely. I've got the hardcover of the old Kevin O'Neill.
Oh, thank you. And it's funny because that's another parody of the police, and enforcement. And so, I had done 2 efforts. The first effort I did was a Red Hook story about, I don't know if this happened where you live, but during the Ides of the pandemic, what would happen is at 7:00 is that everyone would clap and bang pans and pots to celebrate all the first responders, the people who were delivering food and taking care of each other, who went out in the streets. And at 7:00, there'd be this long applause. So I did a comic about that under the guise of the Red Hook. And that came out in that pandemics anthology that I co-curated with Nightwork studio mate Whitney Matheson. And then I wanted to do something completely the opposite. I wanted to kind of take the piss out of the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I played with this idea of COVID Cop. And it was going to be respectful. I mean, you've read a chunk of it. You see, I think, where I'm going with it and what I'm doing. And I'd like to get your thoughts as well. But like, I love to play with language. I love to kind of be bombastic, somewhat, do the things that comics do well, is respond and create an anti-hero, someone who kind of speaks in a dark but kind of funnier way, bring some levity to the horror and terror that we live through, And so that was something that I wanted to put down in words and pictures. And then I thought, well, let me try to sell this to an independent publisher. Let me pitch it. And I went to several publishers, and luckily they read it, and they even said that they liked it, but they said we could never publish it. And I was like, well, why? And it was like the title alone. So then for a while, I tried to come up with a different title, and it just didn't work. It was like Chronic Cop or this cop or that cop, Vice Cop, all kinds of, but it didn't like serve the story. And then finally landed on something called Zealot Patrol. And I was like, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. This is called COVID Cop. It has to be COVID Cop. So finally, when I was kind of running out of freelance work, I said, you know what? I'm going to double down. I'm going to invest in myself for real here. And I'm going to use my savings to pay bills and draw on this comic book. And I'm almost done coloring and lettering it as of this podcast. It'll be done like in a week. And then I already did the research of, what it would cost to print and all this stuff so I could figure out my Kickstarter. And I gotta admit, I was pretty nervous. I was like, all right, I'm about to put this out there, attach my name to something called COVID Cop, and people could be pissed off at me. I mean, listen, I sent this to a lot of people, and there are definitely a lot of my friends that have not clicked on the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So, and I get that, but maybe they'll come around. Maybe they'll see some more stuff about it online, or I'll share some more, and then they'll start to get what it is I'm going for here, So
yeah, I dug the sample that you sent over this morning. I get where you're going. I get why, especially in that 20 to 21 phase. They would have been so incredibly hesitant, we'll just say, about publishing anything like that. But I could see it, and fitting into your vibe and aesthetic.
Well, I mean, I was trying to push some of the limits. Like at the end of the day, ultimately, what you're going to be reading is a love story, right? Yeah. Like it's like I think someone said, and I implied this in my own synopsis, that he's trying to save what's left of humanity, but he's also was trying to save his marriage.
Yeah,
like with his ex-wife, Fate Majeure, right? Who's a badass, But I also play with the idea that the government, who in this story has decided that the worst thing to happen to Earth is mankind. And I think a lot of us can understand that and feel that way, It's not for a government to say and to wipe out, humanity. But in this case, that's what's happening here, because in COVID Cop, it basically takes place about 10 years from now. And what's happened is that there was no cure. They didn't find a cure for this particular virus in this pandemic, So the government started to basically create a new mandate for the police to infect everyone and make sure that we would diminish and exorcise humanity, because it was destroying, or it is destroying Earth, right? And it's almost like the Thanos thing, when Thanos in the Avengers, he was a villain, but he wasn't totally wrong. Maybe some of his ideas were a little extreme.
Listen, I think that first X-Men movie, Magneto was the hero. He was the guy.
Oh,
he was the guy trying to make everybody super. Everybody else wanted to be elitist. But anyway, go on.
That's right. No, agreed. So it creates that conversation of, maybe there's something to it. But then, with our guy, Lincoln Bio, which, by the way, I hope you see the joke in that, right? Like, it's bizarre, right? Like Lincoln Bio. But he is forced to become COVID Cop. But in becoming COVID Cop and dealing with this mandate, he reverse engineers it and goes, wait a second, no, there is a way out of this. And one of the ways out of it for our hero is that he steeps in the toxins of the Gowanus Canal, which is something that I do. And I drink the water, the tap water from my studio in Red Hook. And most people here don't and would never do that. They either buy water or they use a filter. And I double down, man. I just drink it straight, right? Because I figure it's giving me some kind of an immunity. And that's kind of partially the origin of my anti-hero COVID cop, is that he's figured out, the way you beat the virus is to indulge something that's even worse than the virus, this other thing. So, I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it's absurd, but and I'm trying to think of something else to talk about. There was something else I wanted to, what I love about his ex-wife, Fate Majeure, is she's so pissed off that the government keeps weaponizing the holidays. So you get like this fucked up evil Santa Claus holding a bag of dead children. Or like an Easter bunny with a chainsaw, right, who turns out to be Major Fallout. And there's all these characters that I kind of write into the first issue that I would love to explore in further stories. And I've already plotted the second issue and some of what would be the third issue, and they're all standalone. In other words, you'll get this comic and it's a done in one, but you'll want more, hopefully. And I'd love to be able to do that.
Keep our fingers crossed. The one question that occurred to me partway through, do you have any concern about accidentally becoming appropriated a la like Pepe the Frog? Or anything? Is there any fear of like, but what if the right-wing nutbags pick up on this and it turns into the opposite of exactly what I'm trying to get at? Any?
Well, that's an interesting question. And my instinct says appropriate as long as you're paying me. Like to buy my comic book. I don't care. When I saw Art Spiegelman like 4 weeks ago at a gallery, all we talked about how one of the best things that happened to him was when he got banned. Yeah. Last year. All it did is raise sales, is it raises awareness. And even though people were saying that, Mouse was bad, the curiosity of
I want to see what's so bad about this. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, oh my God, I wish I could be banned. I wish I could be appropriated. I mean, for better or for worse, ultimately, because at the end of the day, I know what I wrote and drew, and people with my sensibilities will understand what I wrote and drew. But that's also the risk of putting art out there, is how it's responded to and used.
Yeah. Just afraid of seeing, decals right next to the Punisher decals in the back of the pickup trucks in our neighborhood. But again, that's a sign of success in a certain way. But, but we haven't connected since early days of the pandemic when I was doing those daily COVID check-ins. Yep. And in fact, the last day of in-person podcasts I did before everything shut down was at your studio where I recorded with Whitney.
That's right.
How's your pandemic been? How's you've from everything you've sent along and the things I've seen you post about, you're pursuing a lot of different creative directions. So fill me in. Tell me how the pandemic's been and what you've been doing since.
Well, thanks for asking. And trying to caramelize it into, you never know what you're doing in a pandemic, or i.e. A freelance panic. Yeah. On the one hand, I think you spoke to a lot of freelancers that said it kind of felt the same. Yeah. You usually are kind of working alone and under the radar and off grid a little bit, or, you're not as social as much as you might want to be. So that all happened, although you could feel it a little bit more, and the entire world was sharing this experience, like, kind of like 9/11, but longer, and scarier because you didn't know if you were going to die. And we had to learn about the virus and what to do. And even today, when I flew to Florida and back recently, I was the only one wearing a mask in the plane, and they kind of look at you. Some people look at you like, what's wrong with you? And it's just like, but I'm not hurting you by wearing a mask. I don't want to wear the mask, but there's still a really good chance of getting COVID again. And I don't want it. And we don't know what the long-term COVID, what's going to do to you. For some people, it's already affected them pretty badly, the ones who recovered. But it does make you sluggish. It does change your body. And I can't tell. Is it because I'm getting older? or is it because of COVID? I can't tell. So part of me has slowed down a little bit, but I am 55 years old, so maybe that's a part of it. But it also made me much more creative. Like I had, this is like our Planet of the Apes, like I was able to kind of like think about, this kind of, apocalypse that we're living through right now. And tell human stories and have fun with monsters and heroes and villains and dealing with like the amount of politics that we hear every day, like to the point where I just turned it off. I can't deal with it, Gil. Like it's just too much information that we have. And how much of it is even real? You can't tell anything.
Oh, yeah. No, my day job involves this stuff, so I really don't need it as entertainment the way most people seem to treat it as pro wrestling. I'm fine with, just turning it off when the day ends. But,
I just watch my local news station, New York One News, and it just tells me what's happening in the bigger picture, the macro, and then a lot of the micro that's like literally around me within walking distance, and that's maybe I'm blissfully ignorant about certain things, but also I can't do anything about it.
Right.
I vote, the occasional protest, I'm semi-aware, and then what am I supposed to do about it after that? Yeah. I'm an artist. I write and draw comic books, and so I do talk about it a little bit in my comics, but I'm not running for mayor either,
Understood.
So I did that. I did comics. I scrambled for work. I had this play that was postponed that finally came out at the Gene Frankel Theater fall of last year, 2022, and that did pretty well. But people were still afraid, I think, to go to black box theaters,
Sure.
So it wasn't as robust as we wanted in terms of audience attendance. But it did well enough, and it was cool to see it finally realized. And then also it made me start to think I should adapt some of my plays into comics. So I'm thinking about maybe doing that in the future, and kind of draw it in a certain kind of Kyle Baker shorthand. Kyle Baker's work,
God,
right?
yes. I have a story, but I'll fill you in after we record because it's boring to normal people. You and I would go nuts for it. So,
Oh, cool. Well, I mean, and I looked at like Why I Hate Saturn, and I was like, that's like a play.
Oh, yeah.
Like the way he did that and he formatted it kind of inspired me to think about how to do that. And also, actually, I bumped into him recently, and he's self-publishing now, like these 48 to 64 page black and white, albums, like, French style albums that are on Amazon right now. He's done 2 of these. And, he's always an inspiration in terms of format and innovation and comics. He's really cool. Anyway, so that was something else I thought about. I was able to I got invited to draw a 10-page Superman story that was written by Sina Grace. And I did that while I was at Yaddo. I got into Yaddo again. And it was so weird to be at a residency like as highfalutin and prestigious as Yaddo. And there I am like showing the other, artistes, a couple of Superman pages. But they were totally cool with it. They were like, I want to draw Superman, So that was cool. But then there was a lot of pressure. I have to be honest, like to be asked to draw a canon story. You're thinking, well, what does my Superman look like? What does my Batman, my Spider-Man, my Fantastic Four, whatever? Name a character that we've all that's been around since we were born, And like, what is your version of that? And when we were younger, Gil, there were only a few styles, like there was Jack Kirby, Kurt Swan, Jim Aparo, Steve Ditko. Yeah. And then little by small, over the years, you could literally draw one issue of the character however you want, usually, like now the floodgates are open and they just expect that, there'll be stylistic changes.
You remember in the old days, they would redraw Kirby's faces of Superman.
I know on his own Superman comics, and Jimmy Olsen and all that, because it wasn't on model, and that's sacrilegious as far as I'm concerned, but that was the deal back then, right. So, so I didn't go too crazy. I didn't think too hard. And I just kind of arrived at what I drew. But the case is always that you might draw it very different the next time, and that's okay too. So I did that. Also during my pandemic, I went to the Manhattan Film Institute for a couple of weeks, and I made a short film called There Is No Try. I also worked on a film with Whitney Matheson that we both co-wrote and co-directed called The Tip. And then I co-produced a short film that she wrote that our friend Shannon Goldman directed and edited called Denny Barracuda that got into a couple of film festivals. Yeah. So that was fun. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, you just got to keep busy, man. You know, you come up with ideas.
Did you find yourself, when you returned to the War of Woo to finally stage it, did you rewrite in between?
I cut 15 pages out.
Yeah.
I cut 15 pages because I realized, you know, with hindsight, and thankfully I had that, I was allowed that or afforded that. I was like, wait, you know what? I don't need this bit over here. I don't need that bit over there. I could shave this here and there and make it a little bit tighter, you know? So I actually did cut about 15 pages and it served the story, I think, better that way, you know? What else? I'm trying to think of like what else about the war, who to tell you, except...
Yeah, just didn't know if it changed for you from what it was writing it before the pandemic into what it was to revisit it after, and whether you started to look at it. Maybe what I was trying to get at, you know, that you may have tweaked.
It definitely, you know, as you grow as a storyteller, you learn to be a better editor.
Yeah.
That's what happens, you know, what not to hit anybody over the head with, you know, to pull back here and there. To let the audience kind of surmise once in a while, that kind of a thing, you know, and you don't know that early on as a younger writer. And I still think of myself as a younger writer because I've illustrated stories more than I've written them. And then, you know, trying to write plays is such a different animal from writing and drawing comics to making films, to be honest.
Yeah. Again, how do those different storytelling modes differ for you? What do you have to learn besides the technical, but you know?
Sure. So what's interesting about comics is that it's a different kind of shorthand where you have to earn the next panel for me. And how do you exploit the real estate of the blank page? You know, something where there's an omniscient eyeball that's looking kind of at, especially when it comes to a 2-page spread, what are you seeing and what are you trying to hide before you get there? You know, that kind of stuff. Whereas in theater, you literally have people standing or sitting or laying down in full body. Like, yeah. You don't get a close-up in theater. Right. You can create one through lighting and a moment, you know, but it's basically standing figures in a very small space, right? And then how do you choreograph that? And how do you create drama within that space? But it's all done through talking, usually, you know, whereas film, you can do a lot with behavior. You know, you can get to close-ups. You can do a vista shot. You know, you can pull a Sergio Leone, you know, and just get really close to the pores of someone's face, or you can just pull back and just get like a mesa and some cactus, you know, depending on what you're trying to convey. And so, you know, you just try to work within the virtues of each medium and study. And the way I study is I watch a lot of movies and TV. I read a lot of comic books. I try to go to as many plays as I can, and you pick up on what's working and what's not working.
Do you find yourself growing more critical now that you've engaged in? Because I'm terrible with other interviewers, so I wonder whether you start to develop that sort of. I get what they were doing, but you know they really should have done X. You know.
All right, so I never insert myself to like an entitled fan. I never say, oh, you know what they did wrong with Boba Fett, or you know what they do wrong with, you know, name anything that everybody knows and is talking about this week. I just assume that's what they meant to do, even if I didn't like it.
Yeah, I just mean like the storytelling side of it. Like, oh God, you know, you could have revealed this with but go on. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I'm definitely more critical. I will say I only learn from failures. Mm-hmm. Or the things that I indulge that may not work, because it's making me think, like you're suggesting, what would I have done? Right. Or how do I think this might work better? The masterpieces are very difficult because you're just in awe.
Yeah, you're not going to learn anything. You'll be in awe, but you're not going to learn anything from watching a Kubrick or someone like that.
It's just like they're doing their own thing, and you can't say otherwise. So you just have to sit back and buckle in and go for the ride, you know, and I love that too. But there is, I guess, definitely you become more critical, but not like a dick. You know, I'm not going to be like telling people what to do.
No, but just in your head, though, you look at it and you start to pick things apart in ways that once you've been on the inside of any of those forums. But that raises the question, yes, comics can be a collaborative medium and you've drawn for other writers, but you're, especially when you're working on your own stuff, it's pretty much a one-man show. What's it like working collaboratively, both for theater and then for film, having to rely on other people and their expertise?
Oh my God, it takes a village to make a movie. Yeah. That's all I'll say. Like, you think, like, it gives me more insight into, like, Coen Brothers or Martin Scorsese or someone that, you feel like they get, oh my God, the amount that they did. Yeah, they did a lot, but like, so did craft services. Yeah. So did the actor that brought in their own idea of what this character should be like. I mean, I feel like a lot of filmmakers, especially auteurs, probably convince themselves, oh, this is exactly the kind of character, how I want them to act and be in this certain space and lit this way and that way. No, you're working with a cinematographer. You're working with a set designer. You're working with an actor that literally is bringing ideas that you never thought of. And you're praying that they can at least say the line, string the words into a coherent sentence, And then there's a time. The thing that Manhattan Film Institute taught me is that when we finally got to shoot my scene, because it is all collaborative, I had 4 hours in the set, and it took 2 hours to set up. I had about an hour to shoot, or an hour and a half tops, and then a half hour to break it down. And then that's it. You're now editing what you got. As he said, Shannon Goldman, who's one of the organizers of the Manhattan Film Institute, there's the movie you wanted to make that day, and then there's the movie you make that day, because of what you can get, because you don't know what's going to happen with weather, technical issues, a sick actor, who knows, and you have to build that into your creativity, so, and I'm trying to think of you asked me about the differences, you say?
Sure. About storytelling in one mode versus another. And yeah.
Right. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you're just trying to get to the heart of the truth and then how you dramatize it, right? How do you convey that story? So, acting is very collaborative. Meaning filmmaking is very collaborative with acting and cinematographer and everything, and it takes a village. And I guess in a way, everyone's kind of looking at you at the end of the day to figure out what's next. And so then you also have to wear that hat, and that can be daunting. You have a lot of people looking at you and they're saying, okay, Dean, what's next? Yeah. What are we doing now? And you have to be prepared so that you can answer that question, even in the midst of chaos. That's
the thing. It's a difference between being creator and then having that managerial on top of, directing, production and everything that, you're literally managing personalities on top of,
Absolutely.
I also have to see true to the vision,
Yeah. I mean, there's your vision again. There's the one that's you're sitting alone at home. You're like, I got this. And then there's the one on set. And it's completely different, and preparation. So that even if you're lost, you can look at your own book and go, oh, right, this is what's happening next. Hey, everybody, look what I found. This is what we're doing next, With theater, I didn't direct. I barely produced it. I left that to Phil Cruz, who directed my last two plays. And he worked with the actors. And once occasionally I could come in and he might ask me an opinion of what was happening. But honestly, I left that to the director to adapt my script and put his stamp on it with his vision. And sometimes it clashes. Sometimes you're like, oh, that's not exactly how I would do it. Or, oh my God, look where you went with that. That's amazing. That's part of collaboration. It's just kind of surrendering to the other person's vision that's doing all the heavy lifting, and you have to respect that. And the same thing goes with working with a writer in comics. My questions to the writer is, what if I have any? Is what did you mean by this? Or what my approach to this, is this working for you? Those would be my questions usually. And then in terms of, I said comics, theater. Oh, theater. Yeah, I think I covered it all.
Nice. And you finished the Red Hook?
Well, for now, I finished the Red Hook, the what I call the New Brooklyn Saga, which was 4.5 seasons at Webtoon. That's done. I've already plotted out a Red Hook story that happens after the last chapter of Webtoon. I'm talking to a publisher right now about the possibility of an omnibus, a print edition. maybe either maybe cut up into a few volumes. I'm not sure yet. And I'd love to do more. I love the character. I miss him. But, I have other fish to fry right now.
Yeah, what's in addition to getting COVID Cop off the ground, dare I ask, without violating any NDAs, what are you working on?
Okay, so right now, wrapping up COVID Cop, I did write and draw a certain Sumerian savage that will be hopefully coming out this year, if not next year. I don't know what's going on. It's going to be part of an anthology series. That was a lot of fun to do. I definitely am writing other stories. Like I said, I have more COVID Cop stories I'd like to do. And in fact, I think my next Kickstarter, if this does well, would be a return to Billy Dogma, which is something a character I revisited in the Image 30th anniversary anthology series that I think the 11th issue comes out next week. And that's a 12-issue anthology. And every issue had one page of a serialized Billy Dogma story that I'd like to collect with other new material. And yeah, man, I got to be honest, Gil, like, I don't know if I want to do comics all the time.
That's what I was going to ask. I mean, you mentioned adapting some of your plays into comics, but, at the same time, it's such even in my scant drawing that I've done over the last couple of years, it's so labor intensive versus, what you might get out of
Let me ask you about that, because you just started drawing the last few years. What is your new understanding about not only illustration, but comic books and understanding the labor that goes into that?
Oh, it's nuts. Well, again, keep in mind, I'm doing it with no training or education whatsoever. So I figure there's a whole lot of things that, chances are you're taught at least a couple of shortcuts on how to make things.
Well, maybe in comic book college, which I never went to because they didn't have it when I was young.
Yeah, this is like when I talked to Evan Dorkin.
I had to learn on the job. I had to learn by being an assistant to Howard Chaykin, Bill Sienkiewicz, and Walt Simonson.
Right.
I mean, they're great teachers, but there really wasn't like that comic school that now is everywhere.
And that's I assume there's shorthand ways of doing this stuff. And lately I've just been paralyzed by anxiety and inertia that, ever since a couple of legit artists actually looked at my stuff after shows, after podcasts, it turned into, I'm blaming them when in fact it's my own anxiety and neuroses. It's been if I draw anything, it's a disaster because these people said, stop using the microns, go to a brush pen and start figuring out how to really do a line. I'm like, I could, but then you'll figure out that I don't know how to actually make a real line. And so that's, and then I start and it comes out great.
But I think that's, I mean, regardless or irregardless of advice, you just got to break things. It's constantly breaking something.
Oh, that's my biggest lesson. I always have to remind myself: destruction is my métier. If I can destroy a piece of paper with a drawing, I'm happy. I just have to get back to doing it and getting back to the watercolors and everything. I think it's winter depression also that's kind of gotten to me, even though it's been a mild winter.
You know what? But that's a really great thing. I'll tell you what I did. When I was working on trying to find a more dry brush kind of broken look in my artwork, because I was a little too polished. I feel like when I drew The Alcoholic that Jonathan Ames wrote, which I love what I did on that, but when I look at the artwork, it's very polished to me. It's a very Joe Sinnott kind of line, if you know what I mean, and I love Joe Sinnott. But as I grew older, I was like, I want my line to look more like deliberate accidents. And one thing I tricked myself into doing, and maybe you can try this as well, is I got really crappy sketch paper and I drew most of the Red Hook on really crappy sketch paper. So I didn't feel precious. It didn't feel like I was about to mess up a piece of really good paper. I was drawing out on crappy paper, and it meant that I could be a little more free, if that makes any sense.
I'm with you. And I have one of my favorite recent drawings. I was on the train back from Washington with all the bumps and everything. And I thought, well, I can't do anything super refined. I guess I just got to go loose and Alex Toth-like and kind of, just went with a big pocket brush and came out with something that, oh, wow, that looks like this perfect vinyl glove that this person was modeling. And, I managed to get it and the highlights and all that. And I don't have to touch it. And it only took 15 seconds. But of course, even that feels cheap that, somehow I'm half-assing it. But yeah, I'll get over my own erasers.
But come on, man. Like, wasn't it Picasso? I mean, he has a lot of stories, but didn't some lady come up to him at a restaurant and say something about like, could you draw me a circle or something? And it's something about he drew something really quickly, and she said that's all it took. And he said something like, it took me 45 years to get to that, or something like
it was
that.
all the decades of doing those drawings before that he could knock it out. Yeah, I think it was like a bull or something he had to draw, and just did a quick and was done.
Right. And they just looked so simple. And I mean, and that's ultimately what you're trying to get at least in cartooning, is trying to make it look like it happened almost effortlessly, you know, and simply. And yet when you deconstruct it, you're like, oh, wait, no, that's actually hard to do.
Yeah, and see, that's my realization, especially once I started drawing people, I realized how much cartooning had just permeated my entire mentality for 50 years.
Right.
But also that it was particularly Steve Yao and Paul Smith when it came to how few lines can you use to get across the face. And, you know, those two, Yao's work on Zenith, especially, the Grant Morrison comic that nobody reads but me, and Smith's run on the X-Men, as well as his later stuff from when I was, 12 years old, I guess, 13 or 14. You know, those things, you look at it and it's like, you can get across a whole face without having to do all the lines. And, you know, I use all the lines to cover things up, but, you know.
And look at what Jaime Hernandez does. And he was, not only influenced by Archie comics, but Hank Ketchum, Dennis the Menace, you know, and there's a calligraphy to that line, you know, that just a little bit of a mark here and there, and you get a whole expression. Again, I understand there's some people who love to render and over render. And for me, I think the sweet spot is reduction. Yeah.
Did you find yourself getting to that point as you developed, or was that a sort of early on mentality for you? Is that something you grew into?
I think I was just basically aping my favorite artists at the time, and which was a simpler time or simpler looking time, you know. I mean, I don't think Kirby and Alex Toth and Will Eisner were what I was looking at. It was more like Frank Miller and, you know, Howard Chaykin and Simonson and Sienkiewicz and those guys. And of course, Sienkiewicz is just, oh my God. Like,
there was no aping that except for what's his face on Big Numbers, Al Columbia. But other than that,
right. Yeah, and don't forget, he did start off a very different style. I mean, one would hazard it was more of a Neil Adams type. Oh, definitely.
Total Neil Adams derivative early on, and then he found himself. Right. Yeah.
And then he just went on Moon Knight and said, fuck it. I'm going to, you know, it's going to be like jazz, you know? And then I was his assistant and working with him on New Mutants and Elektra Assassin was just mind boggling.
God.
You know, like just the freedom he I don't know, stole the freedom he stole and said, I'm going to do something with this. And then did, you know, he proved himself, you know, which was incredible, you know, and he's such a sweetheart of a guy.
I've always heard, and I always get you should interview Bill Sienkiewicz. I'm like, yeah, in theory, but you know, I'd have to get out and do it.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna hook that up for you, man.
I was telling a Moby story yesterday with a guest, and yes, pal of mine just decided to email me and Moby and connect us. So yeah, I always thank you for making it. In fact, one of the last sessions I did before the end of the world was around the War of Wu when you connected me with Stoya who was going to appear in the original staging of it. But
yep, yeah, and then she moved. She was going to be in the eventual staging of War Wu, but then she moved out of the country. Yeah. So anyway,
it's again, the pandemic did a lot of things, or it changed a lot of our lives in terms of what we thought we had as just stable. This is how things are going to be for the rest of our lives. But
although I got to say the one thing that just irks me so much is how expensive everything has become since the lockdown. Yeah. And it's exponentially more expensive to do anything, or it's unbelievable. I like concert tickets, you can't go to a concert anymore. It's absurd. Food prices. I mean, I don't want to sound too grumpy, but the world needs to change its relationship with money.
I'm hip. I mean, I go almost nowhere just because I'm this quiet, boring man who lives out in the woods. But at the same time, once I go out in the world, there's like, wow, that shit got a lot more expensive than it used to be. I can handle the cost of these things, but it's still the realizing that normal people who engage in a social life and actually go out and see people, got to make some real choices. But
do you think that if there was a way to podcast back in the old days, do you think Boo Radley would have had a podcast?
I always figured that this is the milieu or the form that would have been perfect for some people. But no, that's a good one.
Are you the Boo Radley of podcasters?
I'll put that as a blurb for the show. I kind of like that.
There you go. You're welcome.
Nice. But tell me about the travel. You mentioned just coming back from Florida from the ACA. In fact, the place you were at came up in the biography I was reading 2 weeks ago for another podcast. Amy Clampett was teaching there once upon a time. I was like, oh, that's where Dean is right now. That's kind of a weird connection, but okay, that's kind of neat.
That's awesome.
And you mentioned Yaddo and the other colonies and residences.
Right. So I was lucky enough to be able to mentor comics for a second time at the Atlantic Center for the Arts in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Mm-hmm. I was just there for 3 weeks, and I had done it 10 years ago in 2012. And interestingly enough, in 2012 was the first time I ever went to any residencies. I was never going to go to a residency. I didn't even know what they were, except Jonathan Ames told me about Yaddo, and he had gone a few times or a bunch of times. And he said, check it out and try it out. So, I was lucky to get into Yaddo. And at Yaddo, the first night I got there, and I knew I was going to be there for about 4 weeks, and I knew that I wanted to go there just to write because I always drew. I was always drawing. I was drawing other people's stories. I wanted to crack this writing thing. So I went there to write a screenplay and to write a novel, basically, just start these things. But I knew that I need to shrug off my comics, my innateness of doing comics. Sure. So I created this idea called the Red Hook. It was like my idea, my thought was, my challenge or prompt was, what if Jack Kirby and Alex Toth got together and created a character? So then I created this 6-page script called the Red Hook, and I put it in my file, and then I went on to try to write a novel and a screenplay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I did that for like 4 weeks. I didn't do any comics. Then a few months later, I had been in. My buddy Josh Neufeld was supposed to be teaching comics at the Atlantic Center for the Arts, but something else came up, and he couldn't do it, so he recommended me, and I got in, and I went there, and actually it was a cohort of 3 cartoonists mentoring 8 associate artists each. And it was with Ellen Forney and Megan Kelso. And that was in 2012. And while I was there mentoring comics, that's where I actually drew the Red Hook story that I had written at Yaddo. And then I kind of showed that around. And then little by small, that became, something, a major piece of work I worked on. This time around, 10 years later, I'm there and I've just finished drawing the line art for COVID Cop. And I'm coloring and lettering COVID Cop as my little kind of side job while mentoring comics this time around. And it's kind of weird, weirdly significant that when I've gone to ACA, I've been working on brand new characters that might be what will be listed on my gravestone someday. Who knows? Do
you think about that sort of legacy vibe?
I used to a lot more. And then I'm like, why? It's not up to me. You know what my legacy is going to be? And and it's my fault. I'm the guy that took off his shirt at the Comic-Con.
You've taken off your shirt at many places, Dean. That's just never.
I'm everywhere, right? So that's it. That's how I'll be known. Not for anything I wrote and drew, but because I took off my damn shirt. And trust me, I shouldn't be taking off my shirt. You know what I'm saying? But that's what's going to be on my gravestone, probably. And I do think about legacy, and I used to think, and maybe it's a little bit morbid, but I remember working on a Billy Dogma story. And then when I finished it, I said to myself, if I died today, this would be the story I want people to know me for, because I felt good about it. And I think that's why I was thinking in that way. It was like, oh, you know what? This isn't so bad. At least to my stupid brain, this was pretty good. This was all right. I spent time on this. Okay. This is the good stuff,
I'm hip. And we're we're headed towards that age, as you know, from some of my stories of recent years, where we start to think about, what we've made and what we've done in this world and how we've affected people, and what we leave behind. Yeah. So, I
often say that my work isn't finished until you received it, warts and all, whether you like it or not. Yeah, I'm a communication artist and I need to communicate my art. So again, you're the period, the exclamation mark, the question mark at the end of my sentence.
Yeah, and that again becomes that common aspect when you mention theater or film or comics. And it's different times and different senses of what an audience is, but it's always got to be the understanding of the audience or how the audience takes it in, whether it's. Oh
my God, you're reminding me. During the War of Wu, there's a particular monologue that's in the play that every time I had to cover my mouth because I couldn't stop laughing to myself because of what was happening with the audience. There were people would start to gag, or I swear one person almost got up to throw up because of what was being said and conveyed. Yeah. And I love that. I love it when it happens to me, like I want to be freaked out. Like, people who go to comedies want to laugh, right? Well, I watch horror films because I want to be scared. Yeah. That's okay too.
Yeah. It's, again, that understanding of reaching the audience and having whatever the conventions are that you're either trying to satisfy or subvert a little, and I think you like to fall into the subvert category a bunch.
I like it. Yeah. I like it a little bit. Sure, if I can. I may not be smart enough, but I'll try.
But you have fun,
Well, that's another thing. Like I think this is what Jack Kirby did really well. Was he dared to question the idea of God and then answer it. To me, I just like to ask the questions. I don't always have the answers, and I don't always purport to have that answer within the work, but I love asking questions.
I'm hip. Last question. Well, second to last question. You did mention the AI thing when you were concerned about putting your artwork online and getting scraped by whatever the AI thing is. You played with that stuff at all, or is it something you just stay away from completely?
Not at all.
Good.
No, not at all. I did. Somebody posted like a link to, hey, click on this link and see if they're using your art. The AI trainers or whatever they're called. And I was kind of curious, and I clicked on it and I typed in my name, and lo and behold, there was a bunch of my stuff up there, mostly mainstream stuff, to be honest, which was kind of cool. And again, I'm okay with that somewhat. And I think that there is some kind of value to AI art or using AI art for certain things, especially if you can manipulate it to your whim or not, or let's see what happens, but not to the detriment of people losing jobs, And I understand that it's some people are doing that. They're losing jobs. In fact, I had a meeting with a company, I don't know, about a month and a half ago. Then they wanted me to, or they want me to, it's still possible, to draw some kind of like comic for their internal part of their business, just for them and other clients. And the person that was talking to me about it, we were Zooming, and he showed me so this is what I did. I kind of wrote this thing down, and I thought it could look and read like this. And he had used AI art engine or whatever you call them, and the whole thing was done.
Right.
I asked him, I said, what do you need me for? It's there. In fact, some of the art was better than anything I would ever draw. And maybe you could tweak the script a little bit. But I was like, what do you need me for? And he was like, no. I want to hire you. I'm like, but in a weird way, it took the wind out of my sails. Yeah. It was harder for me to imagine now, what it could be, because now it was perverted by, and so it bummed me out. And I told him, shame on you for doing this.
Well, that was when I recorded with Dave McKean when this was first blowing up, I guess summer of last year. McKean's first thing was like, this is going to kill art directors are going to just steal everything. They're no longer going to use artists for like lower level jobs. They're just going to plug in whatever their term is. And it's good enough,
Right. It's true. I think it's true. I mean, it's undeniably that's what's happening. Why would you pay for it? Again, we're talking about shorthand and shortcuts. It's another shortcut. Why pay for it? Yeah.
Blah.
Yeah.
So real last question, who are you reading or what are you reading?
Oh gosh.
And it can be comics. You don't have to try to seem like you're all smarty pants because it's me. So
No. And I did just read a book I just finished David Milch's memoir.
Oh, I've heard that's great.
It is great. So you watched Deadwood, I assume.
The first 2 seasons. I've still never finished it. I need to go back and do it. I know. But yeah.
Well, I mean, but the point is that he has a specific way of writing and talking. And the same thing goes for some of the writing at NYPD Blue and other things he's done. So in a way, and I also understand that, he's going through dementia. Yeah. So he probably had a lot of help with his book at this point with his wife and family, I believe. But it still has that weird coda, the way he thinks, the way he writes and talks. It's almost like you have to read the first 50 some odd pages to learn how to read the rest of it.
Yeah.
I experienced the same thing when I read Richard Price's Clockers.
Oh yeah.
The first 100 pages, I was like, what the hell am I reading? What's going on?
Tune into his voice or the voice that he's writing in. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but it's a beautiful piece of work. It's definitely his kind of like through example is his philosophy, like talking about certain projects he worked on and what you choose to talk about is also fascinating to me because, we have all these questions. When you really like someone's work, you probably be like, well, what was it like? Or what did you do? And all this. And then when it just comes from them and how they remember it and what their concerns were is really fascinating too. I was about to start reading Betty Gilpin's book. I think it's called The Voices in My Head or The Women in My Head or something like that. I'm curious to read her work, her book. And I know I also read something else recently. I don't know. And obviously some comic books.
Yeah. Well, it's always comics.
I'm kind of getting, obviously I love, Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips and, Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. But I got to say, I found I'm getting into old 1960s comics from alternative publishers like Dell.
Yeah.
Like Dell came up with a superheroes line that's just awful, but it's great.
Was it the gold keys or what was there? Oh, they had the guy with the goggles or something, right?
There's a guy with goggles. I also wonder, I don't know if they were the guys that did this, but there was another Captain Marvel comic where it was just like a kid that could shoot his arms and legs off his body.
Sure.
and actually I kind of used that for my very first Red Hook story. But things like that are so much fun. Craig Yo, Yo?
Yeah.
He compiles lots of old comics, but he also has a series of absurd superheroes and villains. That's my favorite stuff. That's the stuff I'm going for, And actually to bring it back to COVID Cop, one of the things that inspired me as well in terms of stylistic choices was I wanted to make it look like, Heavy Metal Magazine from the 1980s or 2000 AD from the 1980s, or even more outrageous, like a black light poster art from the 1970s, a little bit like that, That's what I was kind of going for. To me, it was like science fiction from the past.
The future ain't what it used to be. That's
no.
But Dino, good luck with the Kickstarter. I'm obviously going to push it. I've already committed and bought in myself.
And I appreciate that so much. Thank you, Gil. And yeah, it's COVID Cop is at Kickstarter till I believe March 30th, and I think I have 24 more days to go. And even though I have reached my initial goal, I have a lot more to go in terms of being able to pay the artist. And, the coffers and everybody else and make this a true success so that I can actually do more.
That's what we're all hoping for, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
And that was Dean Haspiel. His Kickstarter for COVID Cop is open the month of March 2023. It's at kickstarter.com/projects/Dean Haspiel/COVID-cop. But don't worry, I will have links for it in the show and episode notes for this one, along with Dino's site, deanhaspiel.com, which is actually a live journal. And I think he may be one of the last 5 people using LiveJournal. And from there, you can find links to his Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Substack, and Patreon feeds. But make sure you sign up for Substack. It's a free email, not a paid tier. And as you can tell from our conversation, Dean's making a lot of art right now. And the Substack is a really good route for keeping up on what he's doing and where you can find it. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast comes out every week with interesting conversations with fascinating creative people like Dean. You can also support the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a letter, postcard, email, DM, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you're going to go longer than that, or if you get cut off, just call back, leave a second message. And let me know if it would be cool to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something that you want to share with the listeners, or something that would be really good to share with them, but I would never include that in the show without your permission. So let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. I'm doing just fine. The day job treats me well, and the expenses are pretty minimal, all things considered, for the show. So I hope if you do have funds to spare, you give them to people or institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, and other crowdfunding platforms. And there are people who need help with, like Dean with the Kickstarter here, with getting artistic projects off the ground, or covering rent or medical bills or other sorts of needs. And when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank every month. I make occasional contributions to the Poor People's Campaign, targeted election contributions. You can give to Freedom Funds, Planned Parenthood and Women's Choice Funds. And, well, there are all sorts of ways that you can try to help build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.